Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
If you are a caregiver, or maybe you know somebody who is, many times you're faced with decisions, medical decisions, living decisions, all of that. How do you know you're making the right decision? How do you know whether you should wait on that decision? We're going to dig into all of that today. She offers coaching for caregivers. It's amazing. I didn't know it existed until I found out she exists, and she's back with us with so much insight. Marika Humphreys is on the program. How are you today?
I am doing good, Steve. As I said, getting over a little bit of a head cold, but otherwise doing fine. So I feel like my voice is a little off, but I am feeling fine, which is
You would never
nice.
know if you didn't say it. I wouldn't have known. And working in radio since I literally was a kid professionally, I get it. Like you hear things in your head, like, oh, I don't sound like
Yeah.
me today, but nobody knows. Well, unless
Yeah.
it's like you're dreadfully congested
Yeah.
and it's obvious, like, as if you're holding your nose, which you're not. And you
Right.
sound great. So yeah, I
Yeah.
get it.
Okay.
Yeah, you
Good to
sound
know. That's
fantastic.
good.
Loving what we're going to talk about today, because it's a big thing for caregivers when it comes to decisions. You're faced pretty much on a daily basis, whether they're large decisions, smaller decisions. It can really add a lot of stress to your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I used to identify myself as a recovering perfectionist because, in
Mhm.
addition to being a caregiver at one point in my life, I was also a perfectionist. And call myself recovering because I think we've talked a little bit about perfectionism. I've learned to identify my perfectionist habits and have overcome a lot of them. But
Can
it's
I
a
interject here?
constant.
I'm on your page 1,000,000,000%, and I'm a Virgo, and Virgos are kind of detail oriented, and everything's got to be, typically,
Yeah,
just right.
yeah,
So I say I'm a reformed Virgo, kind of the same exact way, because in that I'm meaning that I let a lot of go, even a lot of the worrying, and if this isn't right, and that's all right, just living life, that's
yeah.
best you can. But I understand what you mean.
Yeah, yeah, because you've identified that these are your tendencies, and so the fact that you have it in your like scope of awareness
Right.
helps. And for me, one of the areas that my perfectionism would rear its ugly head was making decisions. And I tell this story a lot, but when I reflect on it now, I think, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm not that person anymore. But I used to really struggle with even the simplest decisions like deciding what to eat at a restaurant. I remember
Hmm.
so often just agonizing over what to choose on the menu. And it's this idea that I needed to make the perfect choice, something that I was going to for sure love, that just, felt like a value for the cost and all these things. But it's kind of a little example and a sort of a silly example of how much decisions can cause stress in our life. And
Yeah.
often in caregiving, we're making much more important decisions than what to choose at a restaurant. But if you don't have some ways of thinking about your decision making, or you tend to be someone who second guesses themselves,
Mm.
it just can add a lot of unnecessary stress. And I say unnecessary because just even learning a few things, you can start to identify when you fall in that trap and overcome it. But yes, they're huge.
How do you navigate that? Let's go hypothetical here. You have to make a decision. This is a deep one though. Medical treatment. They're suggesting something. You're not a doctor. You got to take the advice of a doctor. Maybe you've gotten a second opinion, but now you're faced with that decision. How do you do it?
Yeah, those are I've talked I've done a couple podcasts on this. I've taught a class on decision making. And I think there is a distinction between little decisions, like again, what to order at the restaurant, and then bigger decisions. And you presented probably one of the hardest making decisions. I remember with my husband, we was first diagnosed with cancer. A lot of the decisions we made were out of fear. The emotion driving us was fear. And that is very normal because this was a new situation for us.
Sure.
But back to your question, how do you navigate that? So I think one of the first things I really think is important is the mindset you're in when you make a decision. And
Mm.
simple things like being well rested is huge.
I knew that was going
Um,
to be your first one. I really did. It's so
yes,
important. You can't even function in terms of your stress level going through all of this if you haven't had not just one good night, consistent nights of decent sleep.
yes. And like I mentioned, when we identified that fear was driving a lot of our decisions, we did that when we were looking back later in his cancer journey when we had actually started getting into coaching and we started learning a lot more about how our mind works. But at the time, we were just operating out of fear.
Mm.
And so I think just being aware of what you're feeling is part of getting in the right mindset of like, what am I feeling right now? Just so you can sort of bring it out in the open. I'm fearful. Like fear is a big one, especially when it comes to some sort of new health diagnosis, whether, if that's your partner or a loved one, whatever health diagnosis they're getting, or whatever the doctor, is prescribing as a treatment, there's often a lot of fear involved. And just acknowledging that that emotion is playing in your life at the moment, or anxiety or nervousness or, worry about the future. We tend to go to all the what ifs. So identifying the emotion that you're feeling and just getting out in the open can help you get in the right mindset. So you can just sort of acknowledge it and say, okay, this is playing a part and I'm just letting that be. And just by bringing it out, again, it helps to sort of not have it operating in the background. So
Mm.
getting it helps you get more to a calm emotional space. That's ideally where you want to start with, is just getting yourself to a calm emotional space.
So
Um,
deeper
yeah,
question here, if I may. Have you ever, or know somebody, because maybe this doesn't align with you, when you needed to make one of those decisions, have you ever gone deep within, maybe spiritually, if you practice religion, asked, of a God or God to help you make a decision?
I have actually done that more now, but probably less. Um, I don't think of it that way. I think of it a little bit differently. And it does depend on the type of person you are and, like you said, how kind of connected you feel with other forces, whether you want to call it God or the universe or
Sure.
whatever. I now think of it more as sitting with a decision. And I think of that sort of inner wisdom. I feel like we have an inner wisdom, and that's what I would call it. Like it's connecting with your inner wisdom, whether that is channeling from somewhere, or often I feel like it's just the way I like to think about it is that we we pick up knowledge and information all throughout our lives and it stores inside of us. So when we do allow ourselves to kind of sit in a decision and as you mentioned, like kind of let the answer come to us
Hmm.
or be guided to it, I feel like what's really happening is that we're just using the knowledge that we have sort of subconsciously stored and we're letting ourselves access it, as opposed to what our natural, or I shouldn't say our natural, what our more common reaction to wanting to make decisions. And I am for sure a victim of, or for sure guilty of this, is Googling to find the answer
Mm.
and looking for the answer for someone else to tell us what the right thing to do is. I think we do that now in our culture so much because we have all this information at hand. But the problem with that, I mean, first of all, it's amazing. And we can, especially with AI now, like we can Google everything. We can ask, Chat GPT for answers, but we still have answers within us. And
Yep.
sometimes the external answers, they're just it's a good input, but you still want to know what is right for you. And
Yeah.
that, I think, especially in caregiving and health, is a very individual choice. And that's where
Yeah.
accessing your inner wisdom, I think, comes in.
I'm on your page, and I believe what we're saying here is we all have intuition. We all
Yeah.
have that gut feeling. What comes next is trusting that gut feeling that it is the right answer. But many times we go with logic. And when you go with logic, your head gets in the way. And many times, if you just sit within and just ask for the answer, what is the right choice? Should I do A or B? A or B? Many times the right answer, because like you said, we know our situation better than anybody else, even the doctor. Because
Yeah.
you know what's right
Yeah.
for you and your loved one,
Yes.
or you give them care to. But a lot of times the right answer, or what's coming from source or you, is easy. And then you think, well, that can't be it. It's got to be harder than that. So then you go,
Yes.
logic gets in the way, and then you go to the other side, and you pick the harder choice, which sometimes isn't always the right choice. All I can say, everybody's got a story to share this. Any, I remember every decision I've made that I probably should not have over the years, even going back 25 years. I could tell you one decision, life changing, I made wasn't caregiving, but I knew it was the wrong decision. But I'm already at a point where it's like, well, this is going to be harder if I pick this one over here. But the right answer is here and it's screaming. And real briefly, my son, when he was 9 months old, was actually 8 months old, diagnosed with a skull condition. His skull fused together, didn't allow the brain to grow. And they said, you need to pick a doctor and a procedure within the next 2 weeks. So now it's going doctor after doctor. How do you pick a doctor that's going to cut your kid's head open,
Yeah.
peel his skull apart, and then put it back together with wire? And every doctor had a different
Yeah.
way to do this. How do you know what's the right answer? And this is, I think basic in many medical situations of caregiving where it's like, this one says that one says
Yeah.
that. I was driving back from an appointment. It was just ridiculous approach from the doctor, in my opinion. It's just like, this doesn't sound right. And I asked the universe, give me an answer. Show me that I'm on the right path. I'm thinking of a doctor and this scenario over here. And I had just, I'm going to say I'm not super religious, but I started going back to church at that moment.
Yeah.
And this was 17 years ago, actually 16. And as I'm driving back from that appointment, I'm talking like 60 seconds after I threw it to the universe, give me an answer. I'm not kidding you when I tell you this. There was a billboard in front of me that said, Stephen, do I have your attention now? Can't make that up. And what it was a ad campaign for a TV show, and it was an ex or soon to be getting the attention of her soon to be ex, Steve. And I happened to look up, and actually, if you Google that billboard, it comes up because it was back then a big ad campaign. Um, After that, I got reassured, and I picked a doctor and the cosmetic surgeon, and everything turned out fine. And actually, an hour and a half ago, I saw my son in his cap and gown, and he was at his elementary school,
Oh,
and he's fantastic. There's no issues whatsoever from it. My point here is maybe ask for an answer. Maybe ask for an answer wherever you
yeah.
want it to come from. It can't hurt to ask because I never did up until that point. Now, when I need answers, I ask, where are they coming from? I don't have an answer for you. I don't know
Yeah.
whether it's the universe, whether it's my mom. I don't know where it comes, but you know what? I get answers and they're specific, but you got to listen for them. You got to listen for them.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, so much of that is just trust in
Yeah.
yourself. And the
Yep.
one thing I want to highlight there is we are conditioned, I think, in our society that there are right and wrong choices.
Hmm.
And if we make the right choice, then things will go right. And if we make the wrong choice, things will go wrong. And The problem with thinking that in this kind of very black and white scenario is that at the time, we don't know, right? We don't know
We don't know.
how something is going to go. We have to choose. It is only later, after the fact, and often with much hindsight and reflection, and often we look back on our past decisions, usually from a future place where we're wiser, older, more mature, and then we judge our past decisions. That was a wrong choice or that was a right choice. But in the moment, we are just making a decision. And I think this idea
Mm,
that there's a right and wrong choice can just kind of cloud the issue, and I think makes it more complicated
yeah.
instead of thinking that there's just a choice and it's going to have some consequences. And I'm going to, as soon as I make that choice, I'm going to find out what those consequences are. And I love the idea of thinking a couple things. I like the idea of thinking like an experimental approach. And even though we started talking about this with like a healthcare situation where, that's a very important decision. However, I like to point out that doctors do this all the time when they make a recommendation for a prescribed treatment. I mean, and
Hmm.
I see clients who talk about their partners, treatments all the time. The doctors do not know how it's going to turn out. They have statistics and they have some data and they have, whatever information. They're making an informed recommendation, but they don't have, again, a crystal ball, as we've talked
Wow.
about. So it's still an experiment in the sense that this is what I recommend. And guess what? We're going to monitor and see what happens. And if we need to change course, we will. So even in those types of situations, nobody knows what's going to happen. So it's always here's what I recommend, and then we'll monitor. So if you can kind of take that approach, like I'm going to ask for an answer or I'm going to go with my best guess. And then if we need to redecide, we can do that. I think that
Wow.
is just, it takes a lot of pressure off this idea that like I have to make it right from the get-go. Because that's where we can just get I mean, I know I would just get paralyzed.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Crippling when you look at it that way, but looking at it from the eyes of a doctor, we don't think of it that we put the medical professionals on a pedestal. Sometimes we should, sometimes we shouldn't.
Yeah, I
You
wholly agree. Yeah, like you said, you were talking to a bunch of different doctors and they all gave you a slightly different, plan. And I like to, I mean, I actually have had several clients who are doctors, and I say this all the time. I say like, um, it just it's helpful to just put it in context because like you said, we do take their words very heavily, and you just want to know that they're human beings as well.
for sure.
And I mean, I like to believe everybody, we're all doing our best, and whatever you want to believe about that, but they're still human beings, and they're just giving you their educated prescription or treatment or plan or
Yeah.
whatever. And there are for sure facts and all sorts of things, but for every one of those, there's probably an exception. I mean, you can go into Amazon and find all sorts of books about all the people who've been cured. Cancer is a great one, by all sorts of things. And like there's all these exceptions always in the world. So none of us ever know. And I think that's where your own wisdom and kind of combining that with the information. There's some sort of, kind of middle ground there. But really it comes down to you or your loved one. You're the one that has to live with that decision
Mm,
ultimately. So, and especially in medical decisions, I think really identifying what's important to you is
yeah.
key because what may be prescribed or what the doctor may recommend may not always align with what's most important to you. I mean, if it's, I mean, again, I use cancer is what I'm most familiar with because that's what my husband had, but it can be the same, I think, in all other types of diagnoses or illnesses or conditions where sometimes the treatment affects your quality of life, or it will
Hmm.
affect this or that. And that's a decision you get to make as the patient, or as the care partner, or, caregiver. You get to help make, or help your loved one make, and figure out what's important.
Mm.
And a lot of times we don't take a time to think about that in medical situations, especially with medical decisions.
And when you're making that decision, I think we have to base it on the facts, but also the feeling. And somebody said to me long ago, and somebody very, very intuitive, he said, "You are your best medical advocate." So back to the doctors again. We need them. There's a lot there, but it's not always the answer. Not always the end all. Sometimes, sure, second opinions and things like that. Um, Other thoughts on overcoming fear, making those decisions, second guessing yourself. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Another great strategy I want to bring up here is liking your reasons for your decision. I think when we look back, and like you mentioned and you shared, that you can look back on many decisions in your life, and identify what ones were wrong ones and what ones were right ones. And I can too. I think all of us can, because we're looking back and we're judging ourselves in hindsight. When we know more, we've grown, we're wiser, older. But one of the things I think you can do to sort of prevent that, that judgment later on, is being very conscious when you make a decision about why you're making the decision you are. And that is where some of the emotions come in. Like, if you identify, I'm really just choosing this option because I'm afraid. Like, I'm afraid I might be wrong, or I feel obligated, like, or it's the right thing. I feel like it's the right thing to do, and I'm not trusting myself. Like, just getting really clear on the reasons behind your decision, knowing what they are, and liking them. And the example I like to give with this is, let's say going to, like, say you have a, like, invitation to a party or something, and you feel like you should go. It's sort of obligation. Maybe it's a good friend, but you are just exhausted. You haven't had any time to yourself. You really just want to stay home, take a bath or whatever, read and sit out and just relax. And what is the right answer there? Should you go, or should you stay home? I mean, you can make a case for either. Either you should go because this is a good friend of yours, and maybe they've always been there, and this is a way to support them is by showing up. It'd be rude if you didn't. Or you can make a case for staying home because you need to prioritize your self-care and you need some time downtime. I mean, there is no quote unquote right answer. And so the option is you get to decide, but knowing why you want to do something can just help to clarify that.
Hmm.
And if you feel like, yeah, this is like, once you kind of bring that out into the open, like, let's just say in this case, you decide to go to the party because even though you don't really have the energy, this is a really good friend and you cherish, and value this friendship. And this is a way to, just support your friend. But that's fine. Like, bringing that up though and say, I'm going because what I value is this friendship. And then then you can sort of find, if there's a middle ground to be found, and I'm just going to stay for an hour, or like, then you can kind of find a way to satisfy both needs if you still want to stay home. Or you can tell yourself, and if I'm really exhausted, then, I'm just going to leave early, or whatever. Maybe you end up having a good time. But just being clear about your reasoning lets you make powerful decisions, because you are in control, as opposed to just acting out of obligation versus deciding, no, I'm going to go because I value this friendship. Before it was just, oh, I feel like I should. Now it's, no, this is something I value. I
Hmm.
also value my downtime, but right now this takes precedence. And that's a very different feeling than acting out of obligation or shunning your obligations, if you decide to not go and then you just feel guilty about it,
Yep.
So that's how you can make powerful decisions is knowing what your reasons are and then liking them, deciding, do I like that reason?
It almost sounds like you need to set an intention when you're asking for an answer, whether you're deciding to go to a party or to start a major medical treatment. You need to set the intention in thinking, what's the outcome going to be? What is it for the greater good of who I'm caring for? But certainly, and we've talked about this before, take the downtime if you need it, because you can't make the decision. When you're,
Yes.
got all this all going on over here. Love
Yes.
your approach to all of this. This is the stuff that people don't talk about, but so many people are giving care to others, and more and more every day, because our population is aging, our parents are aging, and
Yeah.
things are happening.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Disease and illness. And as I just saw a statistic the other day that more and more people are living with a cancer diagnosis longer. So it used to be that even with a stage 4, which is when cancer has spread from one part of the body to another part of the body, that used to mean a death sentence. And now, just with improvements in, our medical, systems and things, people are living longer and a lot longer. So that also means, though, that you can be a caregiver for a lot longer. And and I mean, there's a whole, that's a whole nother thing. Like, mental health is more important because still having had a diagnosis of some sort, that will just impact you. So, but it also impacts the caregiver as well. So learning these strategies is important because sometimes these are long-term states, I mean, again, aging parents, the population, we live longer, older. And so all of these things, it's just learning how to live well as a caregiver, no matter how long that time is.
It's easy to find you if somebody makes the decision, and they should if they're a caregiver, to get some help, to get some insight and guidance, coaching. Your website's super easy to remember, right?
Yes, Marika. Yes, CoachMarika.com. CoachMarika.com. That is the best place. And I did just do 2 podcast episodes on making decisions. So you can find those on my website. It's a 2-part, and I kind of go through a whole step. So if that's something you're struggling with, that's a great place to start.
Thank you for that. Thank you for today. Marika, by the way, spelled Marika, CoachMarika.com. Love what you do. Appreciate it. And appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
You too.
Bye.
We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.